I've been seeing an insane amount of news about this. Or, like, maybe I should say, I've been seeing the far right being very loud about this specific piece of information. So, we all remember the wonderful, wacky land of contrasts known as Argentina, right? Remember Peronism, rapid descent into fascism for like the third time in the country's history. Yeah, right. We all remember mass protests. Well, Javier Milei has shown us all up. I'm really sorry to say, guys, we're going to have to take the L on this one because after only having been in power for a few months, for the first time in a long time, Argentina has a monthly budget surplus.
Ministerio de Turismo y Deporte, afuera. Ministerio de Cultura, afuera. Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres, Género y Diversidad, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas, afuera.
Oh, we're not going to do voice coverage of this. We're just going to use text. Why do they do that? Why do they got to do that? This video, afuera. So wait, is there any vocal coverage of it?
Argentina, under its Libertarian president Javier Milei, achieved a budget surplus in January, the first full month of his presidency. Argentina recorded a budget surplus of over $620 million in January. This was Argentina's first budget surplus since 2012. The budget took into account the country's latest interest payment on public debt. The surplus follows Milei's focus on cutting expenses and debt burden in a bid to dollarize the economy. Meanwhile, poverty levels in the South American country hit 57.4% in January.
I appreciate this channel not padding those two pieces of information, like really really like sandwiching those directly together. The budget surplus and 60% of the population being in poverty.
Here's a graph from the study showing the percentage of population in poverty over a 20-year period. The 57.4 and 49.5 numbers are simulations using microdata and basically estimates. Regardless, it's pretty stupid to attribute the economic conditions of a country to the policies of a president who's only been in power less than 2 months, especially when that president doesn't have a majority in the legislature. So there's a lot of limits to what he can do. As you can see, Argentina's had extreme poverty issues for quite some time. They've had extremely high inflation for quite some time. And one of the features of an inflationary environment is that people anticipate more inflation if it's been inflationary for long enough. And this expectation also leads to higher prices. There's an observed tendency with inflation where when it first starts, people sort of underestimate it, and then at the end of it, people overestimate it because that's what they've been seeing for the last however many years. Milei's cuts have been targeted towards the political elite, and there has been an economic slowdown as a result of these cuts. But that's actually a healthy thing because the economic activity that was occurring wasn't good. That is, it wasn't in line with consumer demand, but it was caused by the political system. So when you have organic economic activity, like, let's say, the demand for a good rises, so the price rises, so as a result, entrepreneurs pour resources into that sector to produce more of that good to capitalize on the higher prices, thus bringing prices back down. That's sort of good economic, healthy economic activity. That's resources being allocated on the basis of consumer demand, where they'll do the most good for the most people, or for the most consumers. That's stuff being produced that people want. But when you have economic activity occurring as a result of the political process, that's very often not in line with consumer demand, but in line with the decision making of the bureaucrat in charge, with what's politically palatable or what's advantageous to the political elite. So when you move away from political power determining production to consumers determining production, there's going to be a transition period. But that's a natural and healthy thing to occur.
The highest in at least 20 years, the devaluation of the peso was a key reason for the rise in poverty rate.
Let me show you how we do stuff around here.
Valued shortly after Milei's inauguration in early December, the devaluation led to a rise of food prices, leading to an increase in poverty. Reacting to the rise in poverty levels, Milei pinned the blame on the previous Peronist regime's policies. He said, and I'm going to quote him here, the true inheritance of the caste model. 6 out of every 10 Argentines are poor. Milei took office in December, promising to dollarize the economy, tame an annual inflation rate of over 200%, eliminate the fiscal deficit, and end benefits for Argentina's political dynasties, which he called the caste. In December, his government rolled out...
This video isn't very informative. Okay. So what is libertarianism? Libertarianism is a made-up ideology. It is an internally contradictory ideology where you simultaneously prioritize the abstract concept of freedom and the very real, like, policy-driven aspect of letting businesses do literally whatever the they want.
Libertarianism is a political ideology centered around the rights of the individual, the right to own property, free markets, free trade, free people. It's true that businesses and people more broadly can do whatever they want under libertarianism so long as you're not aggressing against another individual or their property. That's called having a free society. And I suppose you could say that all ideologies are made up. But libertarianism is not simply theory crafting. It was a mass movement during the 19th century, then known as liberalism. The United States was specifically founded on a libertarian ideology, and it was the liberals who paved the way for England to become the world's first economic superpower by advocating for and leading to the abolishing of the Corn Laws, the Statute of Artificers, basically leading the way for laissez-faire in England and the rise of the factory system. And it was the adoption of libertarianism in the United States that led to the United States becoming the richest country in the world, surpassing England. The United States was broadly libertarian during the 18th and 19th century, and this was a time of unprecedented prosperity and economic growth. So libertarianism has been tested, and every time it has been attempted, it has made societies radically richer, more prosperous, and not only the elite, the middle class, but also the poorest of the poor, and the poor in general, the working class in general. And the reason that libertarianism works so well is because the state is kept in check. It's extremely limited government, so all that wealth is left in the hands of the people, and they use it to build up the economy. Through the process of capital accumulation, savings are reinvested in the economy, leading to more production, higher wages, and more prosperity.
Is that when you give businesses whatever, the power to do whatever they want, invariably your freedom is restricted. Evidence to this point can be found in all of human history. As it turns out, businesses are essentially just little governments with power over you. If you work...
No, that's not true. Businesses are fundamentally different from states because they exist within the realm of voluntarism. That is, a business only engages in voluntary interactions. To wit, they sell stuff and they hire people. The state, on the other hand, is, as Oppenheimer described it, the organization of the political means. It is a means of plunder, of exploitation and subjugation. The state is a process by which some can live parasitically off others. So the essence of the market economy is that it is peaceful social cooperation. It is individuals working together towards their mutually beneficial ends. For example, when I buy something at the grocery store, they're profiting off the sale, I'm getting groceries, we're both winning. If you find employment, you're getting some money in your pocket, they get your labor, everybody's winning. So interactions in the market economy are win-win. Both parties benefit from an exchange. That's why they trade. And so that's what I mean when I say people are working harmoniously together. It's all win-win exchanges. Nobody's losing, but rather you have mutually beneficial exchange, sort of building each other up. But with the state, it's different. With the state, it's win-lose. You can benefit, but only at the expense that somebody else is hurt. So, for example, if you impose tariffs on an industry, okay, then the domestic producers will benefit in the form of higher prices, but domestic consumers will suffer in the form of paying those higher prices. If you subsidize one particular firm or one particular industry, then that firm or industry will benefit, but everybody who has to pay the subsidy will lose. A bureaucrat can enjoy a high salary and a nice, easy, no-stress job, but everybody who pays taxes will suffer because his salary comes out of their paychecks.
Need their pay in order to pay your rent or get your food or whatever else, your medicine. They have a lot of power over you, and they can weaponize that power. When they work together, they can effectively control the government and sway it into making...
Inevitably, any leftist complaint about the market economy has something to do with the government. Vaush is saying corporations can sway the government and then
decisions that benefit it at your expense.
And then the government will favor that corporation. But again, the problem is the government. The problem is that the government has that power to favor one group or another. That has nothing to do with the market economy. In the market economy, businesses, if they want your money, they have to provide a good or service that you're interested in purchasing. So that's the beauty of the system. It's not through the baker's benevolence that we get bread, but through his own self-interest. So capitalism takes a fundamental aspect of humanity, self-interest, and channels it towards productive ends. Now, do businesses have power over you just because they're offering you something that you really want? Does the grocery store have power over me? And a lot of these critiques are subject to the nirvana fallacy. In any economic system, you're going to want housing, and you're going to want food and clothes, and you're going to have to do something to get those. There's no free lunch system. Under socialism, you're going to want an apartment, and you're going to have to work for the state or whatever to get it. So these critiques are very hollow. I mean, yes, if you compare capitalism to some mythical world where you can just snap your fingers and there's an ice cream float, you can snap your fingers and you get a free apartment, free luxury apartment, with a nice view of the city, then sure, compared to this imaginary world where we all have magical powers, then capitalism sucks. But if you compare it to any realistic alternative, then you see that that in capitalist societies, even low-income individuals can enjoy a very high standard of living, working 40 hours a week or whatever for a minimum wage, relative to the rest of the world, relative to everyone throughout history.
As I say, libertarianism claims to be a pro-freedom ideology. In practice, it very, very, very rarely is. One of the reasons it's very important to understand this is because it allows us to understand a curious phenomena where libertarians and fascists get along really, 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 really well. Like,
this isn't an actual thing. It's just something Vaush made up.
All the time. Basically, every libertarian is one unanswered hypothetical away from explaining how massive state crackdown on dissidents and protesters using the police, military, or privatized police forces is necessary. Like,
Nothing could be further away than libertarianism and fascism. Under fascism, the state dominates society. Under libertarianism, the state has virtually no power except to handle crime, build the roads or whatever. It's socialists who have the most in common with fascism. They both want an extremely powerful government controlling everything that everyone does. And okay, somebody could say that, well, sure, but Vaush is a libertarian socialist. But that, you want to talk about made-up ideologies? Like, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, okay, who owns the means of production? Nobody. Whoever gets there. Most people, when they describe libertarian socialism, it doesn't even. They're not even describing socialism. They're describing a version of capitalism where the means of production are privately owned. They're just owned by the workers. But even if you had like a true libertarian socialism system, you still have some organization or people, select group that's in charge of the common store of goods. So you've just smuggled the state back into existence. But there's literally nothing in common with libertarianism and fascism. Like, there's zero features that are the same.
Immediately, like, that gets leapt to very quickly, very robustly. This happens all the time, and it's one of the reasons why fascists like libertarian economic arguments, because what fascists will often do is, many fascists understand that openly proclaiming that they want like a removal of rights is bad optics. So instead what they'll do is say, we don't want a removal of rights, we're in favor of rights. We're in favor of the right to treat people how we want to treat them. And if they don't like that, they can go elsewhere. The problem is, of course, that this is functionally, as we talked about earlier, a revocation of Civil Rights Act logic. A business owner's freedom to not provide service to a black man is not really a decision that enhances the freedom in society, right? Like, people will sometimes say, oh, well, market forces will mean...
What about a black man's, a black businessman and his right to exclude bigots from his establishment? Or what about East Indians that only want to rent to East Indians? I don't think discrimination is necessarily a problem in every scenario. I mean, sure, racism is bad. I think we can all agree with that. And that's just one more argument for limiting state power. The Jim Crow laws were laws passed by the government. In the market economy, there's more of an incentive to disregard racism and other bigotries. In fact, historically, prior to the minimum wage, black unemployment and black teenage unemployment was actually lower than white teenage unemployment and white unemployment. And the wages were a little lower too, so that was one way that black people could compete, was being willing to work for a lower wage. Which, okay, it's not ideal, but given the climate of racism that existed at the time, at least they're still being employed. And it demonstrates that, even under a climate of racism, which occurred in the past, employers are willing to look the other way or look past that if they can benefit financially. So the market economy is a way that social problems can be worked around. And if you end up paying, 20% more, 30% more for somebody to do the same job out of racism, then at least in the market economy you're suffering from that. You're going to be 20, 30% more cost or whatever. You're going to make less money, and you'll have difficulty competing against your less racist competition who go for the better value option.
Will be good to black people because that means they get more business. Then why didn't that happen during the Jim Crow period? It's almost as though there were other social biases that made it in the interests of the racist business owners to not provide services to black people. This is just a roundabout way of reestablishing apartheid. So the reason I talk about all of this here, okay, is because since libertarian economic policies are a good way for fascists or reactionaries to quietly front their discriminatory policies, there are a bunch of people all
So there's a lot of different ways
who are looking at Javier Milei as a source of inspiration. There's a Sky News Australia video right here. I will look at that next. Why not? I looked up articles on this phenomena. You know what I found? Here's an article praising his budget surplus from Emerging Real Estate Digest. I want you to picture in your mind what kind of person might read Emerging Real Estate Digest, whatever you prefer. I saw some of it on US News. I've seen some of it being covered. Oh, here we go. The FEE, that's something. I saw it being covered on Fox News. I pretty much only see right-wing, or at least there's a bias there covering this information. And a lot of that is because, like, the information itself isn't very impressive, so only the right wing is going to consider it noteworthy because they can use it as an example.
Actually, a budget surplus is very important if you want to curtail inflation. And with 200-300% inflation rate, yeah, you probably want to curtail inflation. So a budget deficit is only inflationary if you monetize it through the banking system. If you were to, like, sell government bonds, then it wouldn't necessarily be inflationary. Or if you, like, borrowed from the IMF. But if you're borrowing from the central bank, if they're just creating money out of thin air and lending it to the government, that's inflationary. So in order to stop the inflation, you need a budget surplus. That's why it's such a big deal.
Set of economic policies, right? It's not difficult to achieve a budget surplus if you enter the government and then just cut spending everywhere. The problem is that cutting spending everywhere leads to negative consequences. Like, what's the point of maintaining a budget surplus if you've made everyone's lives worse? Like, that's like, yeah.
If you've made everyone's lives worse, but that's not the case. It's the government spending in the first place that's making everybody's lives worse. And this is mostly spending that's going to benefit political elites. This isn't, money that's being spent to help ordinary Argentinians. Like when he's reducing the size of government cabinets and bureaucracies for high-ranking political officials, that's just basically that's not hurting ordinary Argentinians. That's hurting the political elite, people that have these high-ranking positions. Wealth is created by the private sector, and the more money that is taken out of the private sector by the state and redistributed to political elites, the worse your long-term economic prospects are going to be.
Like, obviously, right? Like that's like going into a house that's spending too much in its power and water, and then going like, I have a solution, and cut power and water. There, now we're not like spending too much in it. Like, okay, that's great. You need a shower, though.
Now let's talk about the...
Look at this video up here. Milei takes charge. Argentina's president fights socialism with free market reforms. It's not exactly subtle the kind of person who's promoting Milei. Media bias, subtle. Jobs versus machines, the rise of artificial intelligence. I don't know. Flooded in debt. Rand Paul's fight to fix federal flood insurance. The full Rand Paul on COVID, the lab leak, and Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, federal flood insurance is pretty stupid because you're just subsidizing people to rebuild where there's going to be another flood. Like, it's just dumb.
Fauci, whatever. It's a type of guy.
Man they call the Argentinian Trump, President Javier Milei has been in the job.
Is this too rambly? Is the point that I'm making trying to come across? A lot of people have their eyes on Milei because they want some kind of positive example they can point to support their plan of tearing apart their own country's social structures and implementing pro-business policies in a way.
There's plenty of examples of libertarianism, of limited government in action. You just need to read up on your 19th century economic history.
That also
months, but he's
project manager, but aren't sure about the skills you need. The PMP certificate.
No, it's more like if you had a monthly deficit in your household finances, so you cut all the unnecessary spending and achieved a surplus, and then instead of going into debt, you started paying off your debt.
Ministerio de Cultura, afuera.
I do. It's the one clip that keeps getting shown over and over again. Isn't it interesting that when foreign media decides to positively depict Milei, the way they do this is by showing him like a lunatic discarding social programs? Like, isn't that interesting that of all the
these are government ministries, not social programs.
wacky things he's done and said, this is the... By the way, he's already walked this back. Since being elected president, he's already said he can't cut all these programs. This is already, by his admission, a lie. This isn't what he's doing. But they love seeing a far-right strongman.
So what is it, Vaush? Is he eliminating all the social programs and leading Argentina to poverty, or did he walk that back and he's not doing it?
And then cut social programs because they don't want social programs, because they want to enforce at the very least austerity and at the most like outright apartheid against certain groups of people. You can guess which ones those are.
Afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad. Afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas. Afuera. Aunque te resistas. Ministerio de Ciencia y Tecnología e Innovación. Afuera. Ministerio de Trabajo, Empleo y Seguridad Social. Afuera.
Ralph, how do you judge Javier Milei's performance thus far? I know it's very early days.
No, but you have to kind of admit there's a certain delicious irony that about 40 years after the Argentinians lost the Falkland Wars against Margaret Thatcher's Britain, they basically got now their own Margaret Thatcher. I mean, they do share a certain hairstyle together, so that's probably the
Thank you for this incredibly substantive analysis. I guess it's a 6-minute video, so they have time to expand on it. Let's hear this guy. Apparently he's a Webster University assistant professor. What the fuck is Webster University? Is that sounds fake. I mean, maybe it's not. I don't know. Australia is pretty fake. A private university with its main campus in Missouri? It's Sky News. And he's coming in from Vienna. So, guess this guy goes all over the place?
So, Ralph Scholhammer here teaches at Webster's University, Vienna, which is in Vienna. You can read all about it on ralphscholhammer.net, his personal website. His main field of research is political theory and international relations.
Webster University, Austria? Is that? Webster Vienna Private University. A private American university in Vienna, Austria. While affiliated to the Webster University in St. Louis, USA, it remains a distinct and separate... It's a private American university in Vienna. 500 students from 70 countries. There's not much information on the Wikipedia page. Just odd, I guess. But, all right. Seems real.
One of the many things that they share in common. No, I think he means it. I mean, this was always, we have one big disappointment in Europe.
Wrong uni. He got his PhD in political science from the University of Kentucky. Well, we're talking about the school that he's teaching at, not the school that he got his degree at.
I believe that's Giorgia Meloni, where the expectations were high, and then we have Javier Milei in Argentina, and he seems to mean it. And he combines something that I find particularly intriguing. He goes directly to the people. That is a very shrewd strategy. And we see even the demonstrations against him, like by public unions, like there are demonstrations, but they are very careful. So his approval ratings, his popularity with the people is still very high. If he can keep that up, right?
But they're careful? What? What does that mean?
He can continue to communicate to the people that these reforms are going to be hard, but ultimately they're going to pay off. He might really be successful. So if he combines the revolutionary and the reformer, kind of the revolutionary that got into power that now transforms into the reformer, I mean, that would be great. A strong Argentina, an Argentina that so openly said they want to be on the side of the West, they want to be pro-Western, they want to be with us versus China, versus Russia. I think that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I really hope that he can keep it up and that he will be successful in the end.
What policies? What do you have a degree?
The first signs seem to indicate that he will be. Inflation is still a problem, but these things take some time. I mean, this is going to be a painful medicine that he has to administer, but I hope that ultimately it's going to pay off.
Pure Argentina from the decades of destructive socialism.
Yes, there we go. Busting out my handy-dandy Argentina inflation tracker. The bottom of this chart, by the way, is 100%. The last tracked amount higher than it's like been in January 2024.
Libertarianism, if you prefer.
So what's your explanation, Vaush? What's your causal explanation between Javier Milei's policies and the increase in inflation in Argentina? Do you have one? No, of course you don't, because you don't understand the first thing about economics.
And will that be perhaps a trend that could sweep through South America? Because you look at other countries there which were previously wealthy, they sit on massive amounts of oil, they should be wealthy, and yet their citizens are living in poverty.
Yeah, Latin America, unfortunately, tends to kind of swing back.
I wonder, man, it really makes you wonder if anything happened in Latin America that might have disrupted the growth and development of the continent. It really makes you. I'm putting my big noodle right to that problem.
Back and forth between extreme.
Leftists love to blame everything on colonialism. Yeah, there's something that happened that caused Latin America to be so poor. A long succession of leftist governments with leftist policies that bankrupted the continent.
Look at Brazil, right? You have a Bolsonaro, and then you have Luis Ignacio da Silva. You had similar developments in Chile. Now you have Argentina. It's one of the very interesting characteristics of Latin America that they don't really have the kind of political continuity. So that's the thing.
Man, it's almost like there are two opposing forces in Latin America, like a local indigenous working class interest in equality and workers' rights, and some kind of like multinational, like racialized business class that imposes itself on Latin America for the interests both of the wealthy in those countries and outside of those countries.
I don't think the interests of anybody have been furthered by the Chavez-Maduro dictatorship in Venezuela. Look at what happened when Allende was in power in Chile. He bankrupted the country in 2 or 3 years. You've had a succession of radical leftists in power in Argentina, and the result has been a century of economic stagnation, hyperinflation now, widespread welfarism. Everybody is impoverished by leftist policies.
Is this going to be a fad? Like Bolsonaro in Brazil? Is Milei going to have one term and then they're going to vote him out of office? Or can he make the case convincingly that it's either this new...
But Milei represents something very different from, say, Bolsonaro or of, say, Ivan Duque from Colombia, because Milei represents liberalism as opposed to conservatism or socialism. Both conservatism and socialism are fundamentally flawed in a number of ways. Socialism just doesn't work. It's been attempted so many times and always failed. And socialists usually favor really bad policies too, even on the micro level. Favor price controls and welfarism. And conservatives, on the other hand, they favor big government too. They just want more money to the police and the military and to special corporate interests. So these are both really bad options. But what Milei represents is liberalism, which is basically power to the people, less power to the state, less power to the political elite, and that's a solid choice. That's a solid political philosophy for any country.
Reform or its decline and potentially a Venezuelan scenario. As I said, the voters in Latin America are tricky. They change their minds very quickly, very often. But maybe he can do something differently than those who came before him.
And I'd like to just quickly talk about the US, where former president...
This guy actually hasn't said anything that comes across as like super duper partisan to me, by the way. Just to be clear, like I don't think he said anything that I would like immediately consider. He's being pretty light-handed, I think. It almost seems to me like she wants him to do a big spiel on how, like, Milei has defeated socialism forever. You know?
President Donald Trump has been ordered to pay $355 million in a frankly absurd fraud case in New York, a clear political hit job.
It really is. The Trump thing is really absurd. He's being prosecuted by the state for defrauding banks by giving them his own subjective valuation of the collateral he's putting up in a $100 million plus loan deal, something like that. So, what, the bank's not going to do their own evaluation of the collateral? They're just going to take his word for it? Obviously, the bank's going to do their own due diligence. The bank isn't alleging any wrongdoing here. This is purely political. It's a witch hunt. They're attacking Trump because they think it'll look bad on him during the election. It's as simple as that.
Well, it really speaks confidence on your part to the input your guest will offer, that you have to poison the well by preloading the opinion that's acceptable on this network, you know?
What, she's not allowed to have an opinion?
It's going to be appealed, but in the meanwhile, we've got a group of truckers now threatening to boycott New York, refusing to deliver in that city, which would have a huge
happened on that trucker thing.
This protest gets off the ground. Let's hear from one of these.
Not like Canadian truckers. They know how to protest.
What are you talking about? Refuse to deliver to New York City? New York City has more GDP than most countries. What? If you don't deliver to New York City, you'll just lose your job. Like, truckers aren't like, you're not like wandering cowboys.
No, it was going to be like a protest thing, but I think it fizzled out.
Bring it to a place.
The Runner is the world's first hemp.
Out of there.
I can't, it's not, and then the music is copyright. They already backed off already?
Ralph, we're seeing truckers and farmers becoming a political force, a powerful political force.
The trucker put a TikTok out saying, so it literally is just one trucker. Is Sky News this much worse than Fox News? This feels worse. Genuinely. It's really bad.
Yeah, and once again, those in power and the media don't get it. Right? They don't understand that the more you try to prevent, whether it's right-wing parties in Europe or Donald Trump in the United States, the more you try to prevent them from participating in elections.
Okay, now we're getting to the crazy partisanship.
The more popular they get, because they see it, and I think they're right in that assessment. They don't see this as an attack on Donald Trump. They see it as an attack on them. They feel that there is this guy, as funny and idiosyncratic as he is, but he speaks for us. So if they try to gag him, basically they try to gag us. And this is exactly what we see in Germany. This is exactly what we see in other parts of the West as well. But